Have you ever met someone who completely changed the course of your life when you least expected it? Someone who walked in with a smile that felt like home, even though you'd never met before? This is that story, one about second chances, unexpected love, and the courage to trust again when everything in you screams to run. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to follow more stories that remind us all that love finds us in the most unexpected places, often when we've stopped looking. James Sullivan stood in his kitchen at 6:30 a.m., dark circles under his eyes as he packed his daughter's lunch. At 42, he'd mastered the art of creating perfectly symmetrical peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cutting off crusts with surgical precision, and remembering which days Lily needed her soccer uniform versus her science club t-shirt. What he hadn't mastered was sleeping through the night without waking up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. "Dad, you put apple slices in my lunch yesterday too," Lily said, appearing in the doorway with her wild brown curls still tangled from sleep. At 12, she was already developing that preteen tone that suggested her father was possibly the most embarrassing human on the planet. "And?" James asked, sliding the apple slices into a small container. "And Emma says only babies eat the same lunch 2 days in a row," Lily replied, rolling her eyes dramatically. James sighed, pulling the apple slices back out. "Emma sounds like she has very strong opinions about fruit. What would the sophisticated lunch packer suggest instead?" "Grapes," Lily said decisively. "Cut in half so I don't choke." "I've been cutting your grapes in half since you were 2, Lil." "I think I can handle it," James said, reaching for the refrigerator. "Go brush your teeth and hair, preferably in that order." As Lily trudged back upstairs, James leaned against the counter and closed his eyes for just a moment. 3 years as a single dad, and some days it still felt like he was drowning. After Sarah died, he'd thrown himself into being both parents, determined that Lily would never feel the absence of her mother in any practical way. But the exhaustion was bone deep, and sometimes, in quiet moments like this, he allowed himself to acknowledge it. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, "Don't forget, parent-teacher conferences tonight. I can take Lily if you need to work late." James texted back a quick thanks. His sister Kate had been his lifeline these past years, stepping in whenever his job as an architectural engineer demanded late nights or travel. He'd been fortunate that his firm had been understanding about his situation, allowing him to work remotely when possible and adjusting his schedule around Lily's needs. But he still felt the constant pull between being a good father and maintaining the career he'd worked so hard to build. The morning routine continued with its usual controlled chaos, finding Lily's missing shoe, reminding her to pack her math homework, and finally hustling her into the car with exactly 7 minutes to make the 10-minute drive to school before the late bell. "Love you, Lil," he called as she slammed the car door, already running toward her friends gathered near the entrance. She turned, gave a quick wave that was more acknowledgement than affection, and disappeared into the building. James sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary, gathering his energy for the day ahead. His phone buzzed again, this time his boss, asking if he could come in early for a meeting with a potential new client. "On my way," he texted back, putting the car in drive. The architectural firm of Donovan and Partners occupied the 12th floor of a sleek downtown building. James had been with them for 15 years, working his way up from junior draftsman to senior project manager. The office was all glass and steel, with drafting tables and computer stations arranged in an open floor plan designed to encourage collaboration. James liked the energy of the space, even on days when he felt disconnected from it. "There he is," called Michael Donovan, the firm's founder and James's mentor. "James, I want you to meet someone. This is Eliza Chen from Horizon Development. They're looking to build a mixed-use property on the old waterfront site, and I think you're exactly the right person to lead this project." James turned to greet the client and found himself momentarily speechless. Eliza Chen was striking, not in the conventional way that immediately draws attention, but in a manner that made it impossible to look away once you noticed her. She had intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything with careful consideration, and when she smiled and extended her hand, James felt an unexpected jolt. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice warm but professional. "Michael speaks very highly of your work. I've seen your designs for the Riverside Community Center, and they're exactly the kind of thoughtful architecture we're looking for." James recovered his composure quickly, shaking her hand. "Thank you, Miss Chen. The Riverside project was a labor of love. I'd be very interested in hearing more about your vision for the waterfront." The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which James found himself increasingly intrigued, both by the project and by Eliza Chen. She was clearly brilliant, articulating a vision for the waterfront development that balanced commercial interests with community needs in a way that aligned perfectly with James's own architectural philosophy. She challenged his initial suggestions with thoughtful questions rather than dismissals, and by the end of the meeting, they had the beginnings of a concept that excited them both. "I think we have the makings of a great partnership," Michael said as they wrapped up. "James, why don't you take Eliza to lunch to discuss next steps?" James hesitated, glancing at his watch. "I actually have parent-teacher conferences this evening, so I was planning to work through lunch to make sure I can leave on time." "I understand completely," Eliza said before Michael could respond. "Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting later this week?" Or, James found himself saying, "There's a cafe in the lobby that makes decent sandwiches. We could grab something quick and continue our discussion." Eliza smiled, and James noticed a small dimple in her right cheek that hadn't been visible during their more formal meeting. "That sounds perfect." Over lunch, their conversation gradually shifted from the professional to the personal. James learned that Eliza had moved to the city just 6 months ago to open the regional office for Horizon Development. She'd grown up in Seattle, studied architecture at MIT, and worked in Singapore for several years before returning to the States. "And what about you?" she asked, stirring her iced tea. "Have you always been in this city?" "Born and raised," James replied. "Except for college and a brief stint in Chicago, I've been here my whole life." "And your family?" "Michael mentioned you have a daughter?" James nodded, his expression softening. "Lily. She's 12 going on 25. Smart, stubborn, and currently convinced that I'm ruining her life by not letting her have her own social media accounts." Eliza laughed. "Sounds like a normal 12-year-old. And her mother? Is she also fighting the social media battle?" The question was casual, but James felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "Her mother passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." Eliza's expression shifted immediately to one of genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry, James. That must be incredibly difficult for both of you." "It has been," he admitted. "But we're finding our way. Lily's amazing, resilient in ways I never expected. And I have a great support system. My sister lives nearby and helps out a lot." Eliza nodded, and what James appreciated most was that she didn't offer platitudes or change the subject awkwardly as many people did when they learned he was a widower. Instead, she asked, "What was she like? If you don't mind talking about her." No one had asked him that in a long time. Most people in his life had known Sarah, and strangers typically avoided the topic altogether once they learned she had died. "Sarah was vibrant," he said after a moment. "She was an elementary school art teacher, and she approached everything with this creative energy that was contagious. She could turn a rainy Saturday into an adventure with just some cardboard boxes and her imagination. Lily has that same spark." "She sounds wonderful," Eliza said softly. "She was," James agreed. Then, feeling the need to shift away from memories that still ached, he added, "And what about you? Family?" "No children," Eliza replied. "I was married briefly in my 20s, one of those whirlwind romances that burns bright and fast. We realized pretty quickly that we wanted different things. He wanted me to follow him to his next job opportunity, and I wanted to build my own career. Since then, it's mostly been work. No regrets? James asked. Eliza considered the question. About the divorce? No. About prioritizing work over everything else for the past decade? Sometimes. That's partly why I took this job, to build something meaningful, but also to put down roots somewhere. Start creating a life outside of conference rooms and construction sites. Their lunch stretched longer than the quick sandwich James had suggested, and by the time they returned to the office, he felt a connection to Eliza that went beyond professional interest. It wasn't romantic, or at least, he didn't allow himself to think of it that way, but there was an ease to their conversation that had been missing from his interactions for a long time. I look forward to working with you on this project, Eliza said as they parted ways in the office lobby. Likewise, James replied. I'll have some preliminary sketches for you by our next meeting. She smiled that dimpled smile again. I'll hold you to that, Mr. Sullivan. The parent-teacher conferences that evening were largely positive. Lily was thriving academically, though her math teacher mentioned she could be more engaged during class discussions, which James suspected was code for talks too much to her friends. She has a sharp mind, Ms. Winters, her English teacher, told him. And a beautiful way with words. But there's a sadness there sometimes. Has she been talking to anyone? Professionally, I mean? James shifted uncomfortably in the too small chair. She saw a grief counselor for about a year after her mother died. She seemed to be doing better, so we stopped the sessions. Ms. Winters nodded thoughtfully. It might be worth checking in again. Grief isn't linear, as I'm sure you know. And approaching the teenage years brings its own emotional challenges. Those things combined can be a lot for a young person to process. James thanked her for the insight, making a mental note to talk to Lily about whether she might want to see someone again. The thought that his daughter was still struggling with her grief while hiding it from him made his heart ache. When he picked Lily up from his sister's house later that evening, she was unusually quiet on the drive home. Everything okay, Lil? He asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She shrugged, staring out the window. Aunt Kate asked if you were dating anyone. James nearly swerved the car. She what? She was on the phone with someone and said it was high time James got back out there. Are you? Getting back out there? James gripped the steering wheel tighter. No, Lily, I'm not dating anyone. And I'm going to have a word with your aunt about appropriate phone conversations to have around you. Would you tell me if you were? Lily pressed. Dating someone, I mean. James pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine before turning to face his daughter. Of course I would. You would be the first to know. But that's not something you need to worry about right now, okay? Lily studied his face with an intensity that reminded him painfully of Sarah. I wouldn't mind, you know. If you dated someone. Mom wouldn't mind either. James felt his throat tighten. That's good to know, Lil. But right now, it's just you and me, and that's more than enough for me. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer, and hopped out of the car. As James watched her run up to the house, he realized that for the first time in 3 years, he had actually thought about the possibility of dating again, and the thought hadn't filled him with guilt or dread. The next few weeks saw James and Eliza working closely on the waterfront project. Their professional relationship quickly developed into a friendship as they discovered shared interests beyond architecture. Both loved obscure foreign films, had a weakness for spicy food, and enjoyed hiking. James found himself looking forward to their meetings and the easy conversation that flowed between them. One evening, as they worked late at the office finalizing the initial proposal for the City Planning Commission, Eliza noticed James checking his watch repeatedly. Do you need to get home to Lily? She asked. No, she's at a sleepover tonight. I'm just realizing we've been at this for hours and I'm starving. There's a good Thai place around the corner if you're interested in taking a break for dinner. The invitation had slipped out naturally, but as soon as he said it, James felt a flutter of nervousness. Was he asking her on a date? Was that what he wanted? If Eliza noticed his internal conflict, she didn't show it. I'd love that. I've been craving pad thai all week. The restaurant was small and intimate, with low lighting and tables close enough together that they had to lean in to hear each other over the ambient noise. They ordered family-style, pad thai for Eliza, green curry for James, and spring rolls to share. So, Eliza said after they'd placed their order, "Tell me something about James Sullivan that isn't in your professional bio." James laughed. Like what? Like, what's your guilty pleasure TV show? What were you like as a teenager? What's the most impulsive thing you've ever done? Okay, let's see, James said, warming to the game. Guilty pleasure TV, cooking competition shows, especially the ones where they have ridiculous time constraints and impossible ingredients. As a teenager, I was painfully shy and spent most of my time drawing buildings in notebooks. And the most impulsive thing? He paused, thinking. Probably asking Sarah to marry me after only knowing her for 3 months. Eliza raised her eyebrows. That is impulsive. How did that happen? James smiled at the memory. We met at a friend's party. She was this vibrant, creative force, and I was this structured, methodical architect. Complete opposites in many ways. But something just clicked. 3 months later, we were at this overlook in the mountains, and I just knew I wanted to spend my life with her. I didn't have a ring or anything, just asked her right there. She teased me about it for years, said I was so practical about everything else but completely lost my mind when it came to proposing. That's beautiful, Eliza said softly. And clearly it worked out. It did, James agreed. We had our challenges like any couple, but we were happy. Even when she got sick, we found moments of joy. He took a sip of his water, surprised at how easily he was talking about Sarah. Your turn. Same questions. Eliza laughed. Guilty pleasure TV, reality dating shows, the more ridiculous the premise, the better. As a teenager, I was a competitive swimmer and incredibly serious about everything. And the most impulsive thing I've ever done. She thought for a moment. Probably moving to Singapore with only 2 weeks' notice for a job opportunity. I had never even visited before accepting the position. That's brave, James said admiringly. Or foolish, Eliza countered with a smile. But it worked out. I learned a lot about myself living in a completely different culture. Their food arrived, and as they shared the dishes, their conversation continued to flow easily between professional topics and personal stories. James found himself laughing more than he had in years, and when Eliza reached across the table to steal the last spring roll, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected current through him. Sorry, they both said simultaneously, then laughed. You take it, James insisted. Let's split it, Eliza suggested, breaking the roll in half and offering him a piece. It was such a small gesture, but something about it, the easy sharing, the lack of pretense, made James realize how much he'd missed this kind of connection. As they walked back to the office parking garage, a light rain began to fall. Without thinking, James took off his jacket and held it over Eliza's head. Such a gentleman, she teased, stepping closer to stay under the makeshift umbrella. Force of habit, he replied. Years of protecting Lily's hair from the elements. Apparently, rain is a mortal enemy to preteen girls everywhere. Eliza laughed, and in that moment, standing close together under his jacket with rain falling around them, James felt a shift, a recognition that what he felt for Eliza was more than friendship or professional admiration. I had a really nice time tonight, she said softly as they reached her car. Me too, James replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. For a moment, he thought she might lean in, or he might, but instead, she took a small step back, breaking the spell. I'll see you tomorrow for the planning commission meeting, she asked, her voice returning to its professional tone.